Welcome to Humans of Reliability. My name is Sylvain Kalash. I'm the head of the Rootly AI Labs and your host for today. In this episode, we are speaking with Stephen Townsend, who is a performance and reliability enthusiast based in Auckland, New Zealand. He is the host of the Slight Reliability podcast, also the team lead SRE at the company Blue Current. Let's get started. So, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about you and your career?
Okay, so studied computer science, and then I thought, well, I can't do this for a living. This is way too boring. So I'd always done acting and musicals and singing throughout my life at school. So I auditioned for the New Zealand Drama School. It's called Toi Whakaari in New Zealand, and it's pretty hard to get into. And I thought, let's just try. And I auditioned and I got in. So I spent 3 years training to become a professional actor, which obviously didn't pan out, but then I went back into IT. Not back into IT. I went into IT for the first time. I just couldn't find a job. No one would hire me because there's this 3.5 year gap where they're like, well, what were you doing? I was learning to be an actor. But I managed to land this job doing performance testing. And I did that for 10 years through different consulting companies, going around performance testing all kinds of organizations and systems. Then I joined IAG as a big insurance company as a sort of permanent employee doing performance engineering for another 3 years. And then I kind of got stuck and realized, this is such a narrow scope. I want to have a bigger impact. I want to be more involved in how we either build or operate software in the bigger sense. And that's when I got involved in SRE. And also the time I started my podcast, Slight Reliability, which is a chance to do public learning because I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I'd always been very good at performance testing, and I spoke about it and blogged about it. So this is a chance to go, I don't know anything at all. Come learn with me. And that's how it started. So yeah, I did that for a few years. I was a developer advocate for a year. And now I manage teams of engineers and people working in tech.
Wow. Highly recommend Stephen podcast. If you don't know it yet, highly recommend subscribing to it. What's cool with Stephen is that we did a prep call before this recording, and we had one idea to speak about, and then we came up with another idea. And now you just told me you were into acting. So I'd like to have a conversation about this. Yeah. But today we decided to speak about something else. Not as fun. I'd love to learn about your acting journey. But here we're here to speak about burnout, which is something you've experienced yourself. Can you share a little bit about your story around burnout?
Sure. Look, I think I've had a couple of burnout situations in my life, and you say it's not a fun topic. I'm really passionate about it. I'm more excited about this conversation than I've been about a podcast conversation in a while because it's so personal to me. I think it was about 6 years ago. I was the performance test lead on a massive transformation project, like hundreds of people, lots of vendors involved, huge pressure. And it was my job not only to deliver performance testing services myself, but to make sure that 10 other teams were doing sufficient performance testing and to manage all that and prioritize and get the improvements that we needed. There was something about that, and I'm still unpacking that, which led to me getting extremely stressed out, very anxious, and eventually, without even realizing it was happening, getting to a tipping point of burnout where suddenly I was just unable to sleep. It just happened like bang. So what happened was I was in that really stressed out situation. Every day I was sort of dreading work. I knew my heart was pounding and adrenaline was hitting me all day. And then there was a restructure, and I was hoping in that restructure there was a chance for me to get a new role and escape the situation. And when that didn't happen, that's when overnight burnout happened. So yeah, I think I've always had a tendency toward anxiety, but it was this particular situation, which actually I could go into in more detail. I think for me personally, large transformation programs with huge amounts of complexity and very little autonomy are something that I don't cope very well with at the moment. So I think that's what set me off. And it was months and months and months of ongoing building. And I can talk more about why I think that was as we go through today.
You said something that surprised me. You said you are still unpacking this. How many years ago was this?
6 years.
Wow. Yeah. So it's definitely something that takes time to process. Before going into detail, maybe let's talk about how, for those in the audience who are not familiar really with what the term burnout carries. Maybe can you give us a definition or your definition of burnout.
Sure. And I'm a person who's been through what I consider burnout. I'm not an expert at all. I would recommend episode 103 of my podcast, where colleague Alexander, who I think is a lot more educated and about this, articulates it better than I ever could. But I think fundamentally, our bodies cannot tell the difference between being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and being on a Teams call, which is very stressful with a bunch of, with some pressure, right? So what happens in those situations? We go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? And we have all these physical reactions because of that. Our cortisol rises, we sweat, our heart starts racing, and that's normal. But it's important to know that our bodies can't tell the difference between those two things. And we need to come down from that somehow. So when you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you run and you've got this physical exertion and you escape and you get in the cave. I can relax. When you're on a Teams call, you're feeling all the same things, and then boom, you're in the next meeting. And you never get that chance to sort of recover and let it out, right? Unless you are actively understanding yourself and knowing you need to do something. I need to go for 10 minutes for a walk outside or whatever it is that you need to do, right? It's about understanding yourself. So that's part of it. But I think that from my experience, having those fight, flight, freeze situations is a normal part of life, right? Whether we acknowledge it or not, not every day, but there's plenty of times where you'll be in a situation and you're like, oh, freeze, or you're like, no, or you want to run away. Like I often want to run away. That's one of my things. As long as you can recover from those things, you're in a sort of stable place. But if you're in a situation where you're going from situation to situation to situation to situation and you're not recovering from those, it kind of builds a series of physiological and psychological symptoms which cause immense distress. So for me, burnout is when you reach a certain level where you're in a really bad place and the symptoms are starting to take over your life and work. For me, that's what it is.
Right. And as you say, it's like a natural reaction, but pushed to a certain degree, it's something that becomes very unhealthy. Were you familiar with this concept? Like, how did you get to learn about that? Because I definitely think that's something that now I think people speak more and more about it. Personally, when I started my career, never heard of this for like maybe the first 10 years of my career, maybe more. Yeah. So were you aware about it? How did you figure that you were, in this state?
I didn't know. I'd never heard of the term burnout before. Right. I knew something was seriously wrong when I stopped being able to sleep. I was getting, say, 2 hours a night, probably, but I would get to sleep at 3 a.m, wake up at 5. And for me, some people can work on 2 hours sleep. I can't. I'm just, there's nothing I can do. And then that happened once, and then the second night, and then the third night, and then I started spiraling about I'm never going to be able to sleep again. Then I knew like this is really, really bad. And that's when I reached out to my boss and I went to a doctor and said, like, what is happening? That's when I knew something was wrong. And it was only, I actually don't know at what point, but I'm quite an open person and I tell people everything. I'm an open book. I said, this is how I'm feeling. I probably overshare sometimes. And people started using this word burnout. And that's the first I'd heard of it.
And is that something that your doctor told you or your manager told you? Like, where was the first kind of?
I think it was a colleague. It wasn't even my manager or the doctor. The doctor talked about going through severe anxiety. You
touched a bit about this, but I know you have like some other, like what were kind of like the early signs or specific signs? And I think we all react differently, right? But for you, how did your body react?
Yeah. So one really specific thing that happened in the months leading up to my burnout period was that I got this, how someone shines a torch in your face and you get a little spot in your vision? I had that in one of my eyes, and it's not like a floaty, so it didn't, it was always in front of my vision. And I kind of like, what's going on? So I went to an optometrist, and it turned out that my retina was detaching. And she said, this is a sign of stress. Like, you really need to get on top of this, or you could be permanently, it will heal if you reduce the stress. Otherwise, you may be permanently blind in this area, and it can get worse. And that was a real shakeout. So even then, I didn't know I was going through burnout, right? Like, even hearing that. But other things going on were, obviously, insomnia was the thing at the end, which tipped me over the limit. Ringing in my ears, like this kind of almost buzzing in my brain all the time. Songs stuck in my head and repeat. I used to have the same songs stuck in my head for 4 or 5 days, and it would drive me crazy, but I just couldn't get it out. It was so annoying. Inability to think or make decisions, total, like I dreaded going to work every day, and there were certain situations or maybe people that I interacted with which were particularly like, and then just the things you normally think about, heart beating really fast, general sense of dread, sweating. And of course, all of this happened during COVID, which was on top of all the stuff else that was going on because we were in lockdown.
Let's get into the people part and, ask you who told you about it. And you said, not my manager. So was there something about this manager that was contributing to your burnout, and what else was going on that was getting you to feel that way?
My manager was not contributing to my burnout directly. He was pretty good actually, but he had a way too big team. I think he had 30 direct staff reporting to him. So he was unable to effectively support those staff, right? I was on my own sort of acting as an independent worker in the massive transformation program. And it's that program which was the source of, I'll say the source, but now I have a different perspective. I think a lot of it was to do with my own ability my own way that I see the world, the skills and experiences that I have. But the external stuff was all coming from this big transformation program. The culture of the program, the complexity of the program, and so on. But I think manager was fine. And when I spoke up, he acted immediately. And within a week, I was out of the situation completely.
That's great. So manager was great. And when you say this person had, too many direct reports, like, were you doing like check-in one-on-one, or was there a way for you to share, that it was not going well?
Yeah. We had one-on-ones once every 2 weeks. And I think I did express concerns. But like I said, I didn't know what was happening to me. It was psychologically and in my mind, I didn't understand. It wasn't really registering what was going on. Mm-hmm. All of the things about burnout for me were physical. And I was separating these two things. I was like, my body feels weird. I can't sleep. I feel all these things, and completely not understanding that that's because of my work situation, which is bizarre to look back on and say that. But it sneaks up on you in a way which you don't, if you're not paying close attention and being self-reflective, then.
Do you think something, and again, we are not getting into the blame game for your manager, which you think, was good, but in retrospect, do you think there is something that the manager should have done, or maybe that you could have done that could have kind of accelerated the fact that your manager knew you were in this dire situation and act, faster?
I think that I'm a firm believer of the optimal team size is sort of 7 plus or minus 2 people. And anything above, say, 12, I've managed just over 12 people, and that's difficult to be aware enough of what each person in the team is doing so that you can effectively support them, right? So it would have helped if we had smaller teams. I think that would have helped my manager. I don't think he did anything wrong. I think it was just the structure. And I think we'll probably talk about this more in the future, but biggest thing I think that we can do to avoid the particular kind of situation that affected me, and this is, I know your audience is a lot about people who'll be on call, which is a different kind of situation. For me, it was massive transformation, complex delivery, and big projects, right? For me, the thing we can do is how can we organize our enterprise architecture? How can we organize our teams? How can we run programs so that people have sufficient autonomy and agency to just do their work, right? And if you don't actively do that, then I think that's a major contributor to burnout. If people have a pressure on them to do a thing, but they don't have the agency or autonomy to do the thing, for me, that's fertile ground for burnout.
I think what's interesting in what you said is that, you shared, hey, I manage up to 12 people. And even by then, it was hard for me to do a good job as a manager. And, I think what happened in a lot of situations is that engineers who are amazing individual contributors, then as they grow and they become more senior, they are placed in this manager position where now it's not only just, managing the technical part of the job, but also managing people, right? Which is a completely other type of skills. And even burnout, maybe someone is put into manager and doesn't even know about it as a manager, which, in the first place is something bad. Like, how do you see that? Like, do you think the industry is kind of not providing also the right tools or training or putting managers in situation where they are not able to do their job properly because of the context? Like, did you give some thought about this?
Yeah, I hear this a lot. I've had this conversation a lot of times, and I do agree that for the most part, the skills required to be a great individual contributor are vastly different than being able to lead people. That's such a different skill set. And unfortunately, the way to progress in one's career is often requiring you to lead people, right? And so, which is a shame, because there are certain people who are just so good at what they do. You've got to find a pathway, and I know some places they have like staff engineer roles and those kinds of things, which is great. Two things. Yes, when I started as a manager, there was no training at all. I had sent later on, after a year and a half into it, there was some leadership training, which was actually quite useful, but I'd already gone through the ringer a bit by then. That's one thing. The other thing which really helped me, though, and I don't think enough people, when they find themselves in those positions, did, is I said, I'm going to put the tools down. I'm not going to be hands-on, because I want to focus all of my effort on changing my paradigm. I want to understand what it is to be a leader, and I can't do that if I'm still trying to, solve technical problems and get caught up on that, because then that's going to be the thing that I get caught up in, right? So I think it's important, if you're going to take on a people leadership role, to actually go, this is a massive change. I am going to need to completely rewrite how I think about myself, other people, work, what work is, what work feels like, because it's such a different experience. Yeah. And I think that there's like personal accountability too. If you're going to become a people leader, you're going to have uncomfortable situations. You're going to need to, have such uncomfortable conversations with people, but that's the job. And if you're not willing to do that, then don't do that.
Yeah. I think I've heard a lot of fellow, coworkers or friends who've gone to become manager and sometimes are not happy about it, and then takes maybe a few years to realize. And as you said, if they're lucky enough to be in an organization that generally large enough that can accommodate for, as you said, like staff or principal, who are not managing people, are more here to lead on the technical side. But that's not like a given, and many organizations this is just not possible.
I applied for a job at one point recently, and the role was to manage a team who was starting with 16 people, and you were expected to 50% be on the tools as well. And I just thought, what? Like, what is more value? Well, first of all, that team's too big in itself. But what's more value for a person, a people leader, to do work themselves or to empower a bunch of people to do great work, right? The answer is clearly to empower a bunch of people. And if you're too busy doing your own coding, then I don't think you can do that. I know it depends, right? If you're maybe in a smaller org, and depending on the person and the context, I get it, right? But in any situation of any level of complexity, I think that, being a people leader is a full-time job.
Truly, we are trying to contribute and help in a small way, but we are building a tool that allows managers to keep an eye on the health of their people. And we do this in two ways. We collect self-reported data, where we send like a small surveys to engineer, as you said here, more specifically incident responders. And we copy the methodology that Apple is using on their watch. Mm-hmm. We simply ask, how do you feel today? And then we also collect what we call objective data such as, hey, how many incidents were you on? What was the severity? Did you work late at night? Do you have a lot of Jira ticket or linear ticket in your inbox? Are you late on deadlines? Things like this. And then we establish a baseline, because everyone is different. Everyone has like a different mood. Everyone can, work maybe late at night or not. So we establish a baseline for each individual. And then we just track if the trend is going in a negative way, for a given individual. Then we basically flag it and let the manager know that this person baseline, again, it's not about ranking people, right? Everybody has a different baseline, and we don't actually put a number on that. It's just a baseline, so that, the manager has a way to get a signal, that someone may be wrong. And the goal is just to get the conversation started. And as you said, I think sometimes people don't even realize they're in this situation. Actually, my sister also experienced a burnout, and she learned it, I think, similarly to you. She went to the doctor, and she was like, hey, like, you are experiencing a burnout. You need to to stop your job right now. So yeah, and as you said, like, I think the more people a manager has, the harder it is to keep touch with your team and spot something is wrong.
I think it's an admirable goal. Like genuinely, I think it's such a good thing if you can get some feedback for individuals, for themselves, or for people leaders to understand what's happening. That's fantastic. It's very, very complex though, because it might be if you're tracking someone's baseline and it suddenly drops down, it might be unrelated to burnout, and it might be because of something going on in their personal life. It could be having relationship problems. They could, a loved one could have died. There's so many things that can impact that, right? So,
right. Yeah. Which in my opinion, I know it's super complex, and we're putting our finger into something complicated. But I still believe personally that I think every business, has different ethics. But if one of your people has a personal issue, you should accommodate for it. I think we all have, challenges in our personal life, and we should account for it. We've chatted a lot about your journey into, getting in this situation. Thankfully, you got out of it, and now you are better. What did the road to recovery look like for you?
Okay. The road to recovery, it was about a year before I was a normal functioning human being again. Like I was working during that time, but it took about a year. And the first step was going to the doctor and acknowledging this is a real thing that is happening, and understanding there's nothing seriously wrong. Like I'm not dying, but I've got myself in a state where I need to make change. That was the first thing. Sleeping pills. I'd never had them in my life before, but they were an immediate, like straight away, where I was able to get some sleep. And with that sleep, I was able to get a clearer head. And with a clear head, I was able to sort of calm down and start processing what was going on. First step. I also went on an SSRI, serotonin uptake reuptake inhibitor, often used for the antidepressant, but also anti-anxiety. I don't know whether it helped me particularly, but the doctor recommended it, and I did it for 6 months. Yeah, I honestly still felt fairly anxious the whole time. So I'm not sure whether it helped me in particular or if I had quite the right drug. But anyway, I tried that for 6 months. Also, my boss, like I said, within a week, I was out of that program, and he said, I'm going to put you on something else. You hand over what you're doing to another person. And yeah, I got reduced duty, which was super helpful. And then an opportunity came up to join a whole different team and do SRE. And so that's what I did. I changed jobs. I just removed myself completely from that entire context and went and did this enablement work, which is totally different and very little stress over that time. And it was a time for me to recover. Now, not everyone has I had the luxury of removing myself from that situation completely. And I can understand that there will be people out there who will be in a situation where they can't just leave their job. They can't, or their manager isn't willing to just rip them out or put them in a different thing, right? And that's tough. That's really tough. But it really helped me to be able to actually get distance from that situation. So yeah, once I was in that SRE role after a couple of months, sort of working with teams and running workshops and helping them understand their reliability and all these different kinds of things, it took about a year for my body to calm down completely.
Very impressive. Stephen, like now that you've had the time to kind of digest and look back, like, and you touched a little bit about it, but what advice or idea you would have for the industry to do better here?
Wrote a few things down because, honestly, I'm not going to give the perfect answer, but there are some things in my mind. And the first one I've touched on already. I think that the org structure and the enterprise architecture, because through Conway's law, they're connected, right, is so important. And the more that you can give small teams of people autonomy and agency to deliver value and do the thing that they're hired to do without involving everyone else, the better, right? So, and that's really hard to do in a massive, complex organization. And so I often hear, but we're such a big org, we can't do that. We can't, it's impossible. There are really big organizations who do it quite well. Massive tech giants who have broken up things in such a way and architected their systems in a way that teams can do that. So that's a very practical thing. It's not easy, right? But I think that significantly reduces burnout. Like looking back, thinking about people on call, what causes burnout when you're on call and you're like having to respond to incidents? It's not just the incidents themselves. It's if every incident came along, and like I'm being silly here, but if you knew exactly what to do, if you're like, it's this bang, there would be very little anxiety, right? So, and if you were able to solve every problem yourself, the anxiety would be lower, right? So if you've got autonomy and agency, you feel good. But once you lose that, the less of that you have, the harder it is to maintain that sort of balance. That's the first thing. Second thing is I read about from a blog once, this idea of slack time. So like a CPU, I think if you're 100% utilized, then you've got no ability whatsoever to respond to the unexpected and to reflect, to learn, to simplify, to innovate, and to do work that gives back to you, right? And I think if you don't give your teams slack time, then you will burn them out pretty quickly. I think it's Google who dedicate a day a week, I think, or is it half a day a week for that kind of thing. Super helpful, right? And it's something I implemented as a manager for my team and got support from executives too for that. Compassionate leaders. I think we need more leaders in our industry who care about people and show vulnerability, right? I think it's important that if your staff are going through things, like you said, in their personal life, it's important that they trust you enough to come to you and say, look, I'm going through a tough time. Here's what's going on. This is why I am the way I am. And if they can't do that about personal things or things to do with work, if they don't trust you, then they're going to get themselves in a situation where they're not speaking out when they need to and find they are way further down the path of burnout by the time anyone notices or even they notice. And the last one is, I mentioned, it's a bit fluffy, generative culture. So I know every organization talks about growth mindset, and it's in the writing of every organization in the world. But how often do we sit in meetings with like senior stakeholders and shooting down ideas, or avidly defending the way we've done things before, and there's that sort of pathological sort of culture, and there's that bureaucratic sort of complacency culture. If we have a genuine culture of curiosity and compassion, then I think that goes a long way too. Because whatever's going on in the work and however complex it is, if we've all got each other's backs and we've all got an open mind, then I think that makes a big difference too.
Well, that's a great list. And I think point number 2, top of being good for the mind, like the idea of giving some slack to your team and allowing them to do stuff that give back to them. As you said, is something done by a lot of companies in Silicon Valley. Actually, when I was at LinkedIn, I think we were doing this once a month. It was maybe the last Friday of the month or something like that. Mm-hmm. And actually for Google, I think a number of projects came out of this hackathon time. Yeah. Gmail, I think, might have come out of it, if I'm not wrong.
We forget that the things that we do, it's creative work. Like, we are doing creative work, and you can't be creative when you're like under the pump to do stuff all the time. You need that space to be a little bit bored almost before things start, occurring to us.
It is, and I think, not to deviate too much, but I think that's an issue today with kids who are constantly stimulated with technology and don't get the time to be bored and use their creativity. Stephen, if someone who is listening to us suspects that they might be experiencing burnout, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think the first thing is, if you're going through serious, like, physical or mental distress and you think it's related to burnout, go and see a medical professional. I regret I probably went to the doctor 2 weeks too late. Before, it might have really helped to go earlier. Like, I understand this is a real thing that's happening. It's not in your head. You are suffering. Go and get some help. And after that, of course, I did counseling as well, and that helped as well. Second thing is, if you can take time off, and I know not everyone can. It's so hard, right? It depends on your financial situation, so many things. If you can take time off, take it if you can. Remove yourself from the situation, even for a period of time. Let yourself reflect. And then ideally, if you can, remove yourself from that situation longer term, if nothing's going to change. That's important. Once you recover to a certain point, and I wouldn't recommend when you're in it to try and do this, I think it's worth doing a bit of work on yourself, or a bit of reflection, a bit of understanding yourself better. I think for me, it was that I finally acknowledged, I suffer from anxiety. And I had things in my past which had happened, which I just conveniently ignored, going back to my teenage years or even childhood years. And I was like, wow, I suffer from anxiety. I'm not going to cure this, but I need to understand myself better and learn how to manage it. And that's really important. And then learning and reading books is super helpful. I'm currently reading Happy by Darren Brown, and it's got a lot of thoughts about the Stoics. And Stoics, philosophy, which is super interesting. And it's like there are things that you can learn and ways that you can train your mind so that you are able to manage these situations much better. Yeah. Some people love meditation. I don't. I know some people that really get a lot out of that, for example. Therapy is great, helping you understand more about yourself. And the last thing is, like I already said, Colette Alexander came on my podcast and spoke about burnout, and she had some really good suggestions as well. So I'd recommend listening to what she said. I'm not trying to plug my podcast. I'm just saying that she did it was one of my most popular episodes because people are going through this a lot right now, and they wanted to know, well, what do I do? What's this about? I want to know more about this.
Well, that's a perfect getaway for my next questions. Last one, Stephen. If people want to get in touch with you, if they want to learn about your podcast, where can they find you? Where can they find your podcast?
Podcast is easy. You just search for Slight Reliability in any podcast app or on YouTube. The video versions are on YouTube. I'm most active on LinkedIn, which is a strange place to be, but that's just where my audience is. There'll probably be a link to this in the description, I presume. And I'm also on Blue Sky, Instagram, Medium. I write blogs on Medium. Yeah, that's the way. Oh, and just as a side, if you're interested in D&D and tabletop gaming, I have another podcast called Tales from the Humpback Sky. Nice. It's a absurdist sci-fi real play podcast where myself, I co-host it with a group of people, and we tell a story through the power of chance. Yeah,
sounds very fun. I'll give it a listen. Stephen, thanks a lot for sharing your story. It was very interesting. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. No, I was super excited for coming on the show this morning. So thank you for having me on.